And I remember one of the things that my dad had told me when I was young is that if you're working for someone, you're working for the man. Somebody's going to get rich and it's not going to be you. I'm Honorée Corder, and I am a strategic book coach and publishing consultant. I help aspiring authors to become authors and write, publish, and maximize their books, turn them into multiple revenue streams. I have been an entrepreneur since the earth cooled, so about 30 years. When I was growing up, my dad was a runner, and we lived on a farm, and he used to go for runs. And I wanted to be like my dad. And so he would go for a run and I would run as far as I could, which was about a minute. And then I would sit on the side of the road in the country, which we would never let our kids do now, and wait for him to come back. And I would beat him to the finish. And then I was running longer and longer and longer. And I finally said, I want to run a race. And so my first race was the Bonnie Bell 10K in Cleveland, Ohio. And then I built up to run a marathon when I was 9 and finished the Athens Marathon, not the Athens Marathon, but Athens, Ohio. So I finished that marathon. And the reason that that's important is because I learned planning and discipline and focus and determination and setting goals and working hard for something, because running any race, running a marathon is really tough. To run a marathon as a 9-year-old was really tough. And I learned in that piece of my life that focusing on something, setting a goal and working really hard for it, the reward was great, right? To get that. Then as I got older, there was some abuse in my household, and I ended up going and living in a foster home for a while. And then I was in a children's home, and then I went out on my own. So I had some great stuff that came from my childhood. And then I had some not so great stuff that came from my childhood. And I think it's all kind of come together in a beautiful way now. I can look back and see there was a gift in that challenge, and there was also a gift in the good things that happened as well. So I went out on my own, actually still as a senior in high school. I worked 3 jobs and finished school. And so whereas most of my friends were going on to college and getting their degrees and going into the corporate world, I just went right into the corporate world. I went to New York to do modeling and commercials. Have you ever seen me before today? No, because that career did not work out. I actually went to go to New York for a weekend. I went to a modeling and talent contest. And so I was going to, I don't even remember, there used to be these modeling schools that you could go to. So I would drive up to Columbus and take the modeling classes. I'm not even sure that I remember what we did. They probably taught us how to walk with the book on our head, so we walked straight, things like that. And then I was supposed to go for a weekend. But I think like anything, if you want to be a musician, you come to Nashville. If you want to be an actor or an actress, you go to LA, right? Or if you want to be a model, you go to New York. And so you go to New York. And when I got there, they said, well, we think you have potential, but you've got to be here. You have to be here. You can't be in Ohio making it big in New York. You have to live and, plant your tree where you want to succeed. And so I went to New York and made the rounds of all the modeling agencies. And of course, they were like, well, you need to lose 10 more pounds, or you're too tall, or you're too thin, or you're too brunette, or you're too blonde, or like whatever, right? There was always some, if you were different in some way. And meanwhile, I was hungry at least 3 times a day. And so I started temping. And thankfully, I took that 7th grade typing test. It changed my life in all the ways. And I was able to work in all these different companies. And the thing that I had going for me is that I was from Ohio, and we're friendly. If right, from Ohio. So I would answer the phone, "Good morning, thank you for calling American Express," or the National Hockey League or whatever. And so they would say, "Oh, we really like Miss Ohio. Send Miss Ohio back. She's really friendly." And so I had skills because I could type, and I taught myself how to use the computer and all those sorts of things so that I could be someone's assistant. And that's really where I got my start in being entrepreneurial, because I had gone to dinner with a guy that I was dating and his best friend and his best friend's wife. And she said, "Do you know Microsoft Word on the Mac?" And I'll be honest, I did not know what Microsoft Word was, and I did not know what a Mac was. But I remembered it, and I called a friend of mine and I said, "Do you know what Microsoft Word on the Mac is?" And she said, "I do, I have that." And I said, "Can I come over tonight and learn it?" She said, "Sure." And I'm sure she thought I was nuts. And I went over and she pulled out the manual, the book that comes with the computer, and I taught myself my Microsoft Word on the Mac so that I could go work for this woman's company, because they needed a temp for 3 months while someone was out on maternity leave. And that was my very first entrepreneurial thing that I did, because I could then learn Excel and send an invoice for my services. And then I just started freelancing temping, and that was kind of the first thing. While I still had these illusions that someday I was going to be doing modeling in commercials. And so I was taking commercial classes. Did you ever see me on a commercial? No, because I did a couple of really small things, but that never really took off. I started attending Marble Collegiate Church, and the minister, my very first Sunday, who was retiring, is Norman Vincent Peale. And Norman Vincent Peale wrote The Power of Positive Thinking. So I went to the bookstore, and books are huge in my life. They've always been huge in my life. I went to the church bookstore after the service, and I bought The Power of Positive Thinking. And I also met a gal who introduced me to the book Awaken the Giant Within by Tony Robbins. And I read that entire book and ended up at his UPW, his Unleash the Power Within weekend. And in that weekend, I remember Tony saying, "The past does not equal the future." That was one of the things that he said. And of course, my past was not awesome in my mind. And so I thought, oh, that's interesting. The past does not have to equal the future. Maybe I have the ability to be cause and not effect. Maybe I can inform and influence what's going to happen in the future. So I took that message and I combined it with what Tony said, which is, if you do something in 10 years and you have 10 years worth of experience, you've done something 100 times. If you do that same thing 100 times in a year, you have 10 years worth of experience in a year. So you can compress decades into a year or days, as Tony would say. And I thought that was very interesting. So I started working on myself while simultaneously doing more of what I wanted. And I recognized that I had the ability to take control of my life. And I was able to shift from, I just want to pay my bills, I just want to eat, right? I'm hungry, right? I have to pay my rent. I want to be able to afford to eat. I would like to take a cab occasionally instead of the subway everywhere, or walking because I couldn't afford a subway token. I shifted from limited mindset to unlimited mindset. And once I made that shift from, instead of being limited, I could be limitless, that's when I decided I wanted more. And I wasn't quite sure what more was at that point, but I knew I wanted more. I knew I liked shiny objects and pretty things, and I wanted to travel, and I wanted to go places and all of that. And so I had the ability, I felt, to make that happen.